I appreciate, that's loud, especially this early. My wife says, could we turn it lower and lower and lower? But she feels that's about right. John fibbed just a little bit. He said that he asked me to stay over. The truth was, I had heard such great things about the Canyon Church from David and from John and a friend of mine who I highly regard. He gave you the Good Housekeeping seal of approval, for those of you who remember that. He simply said, we're going to Canyon this week, and he goes, now that's a good church. Now, I don't know what all that meant and how he even knew, but the truth was, I begged John to stay over because preachers don't get to visit churches unless they get invited or they beg. So I appreciate that, and I hope that our time together is valuable to you. I'll invite you to grab your personal Bible or one out of the pew. We're going to look at what is arguably the most frightening book in all of the Old Testament. It's easy to find because the pages have probably never been separated in your Bible or the other Bible, and that is the book of Song of Solomon. Now, before you blush or race the one or two kids that are still in the auditorium out, relax. This is going to be a family-friendly presentation today. But since we have been this weekend on the subject of marriage and relationships, I think this is a great opportunity to visit what I'll admit is a peculiar insertion in the Old Testament. Scholars have made an attempt to try to answer the question, why is this book here, as it seems to be dramatically different? It is Eastern poetry, which is a little bit different than our Western poetry. You know, Western poetry is roses are red, violets are blue, some poems rhyme, this one doesn't. You know, we're used to those kind of poems. It also is a little more expressive and at times will make us blush, and I think rightly so, but in no way is it intended to be vulgar or obscene, even though, like I said, we might have a healthy blush in reading some of the things about it. But the most peculiar thing seems to be why this subject in the middle of all of this prophecy and this planning of God to bring Jesus as the redemptive element of his plan of salvation for mankind. Some would suppose that, well, we've been talking about those kings and those prophets, and this is just a 300-foot view of Solomon's life. You know, you get the 3,000 foot or the 30,000 foot view, and you drop down sometimes to a 300-foot view, sometimes to a 30-foot view of certain individuals, then back up to a grander scope. That may very well be the case. However, there are some things that seem to be a little inconsistent with Solomon's story and the story that we find here. Others have looked at it as an allegory of sorts, either of God and his people in Israel, or predictive of sorts of Christ and his church, as he himself refers to her as his bride and he as the groom. For our purposes this morning, I'm going to ask you just to accept the premise. You can study it further, but for me, I simply think that it is God spotlighting what he believes to be one of the most significant human relationships, the relationships between a man and a woman. I remind you in the book of Genesis, with all of the things that God could have told us about creation, it kind of seems as if it's, and the night and the morning were the first day, and the night and the morning were the second. There's so much more. I'm like, yeah, but what was it? Was it cataclysmic? I mean, did the earth erupt? How did this all happen? What did Adam and Eve look like? And I'm still trying to answer that question. Did Adam have a belly button? I don't know, because we're not told. But one of the things that are described about Adam and Eve is their relationship, right? God created them male and female, and the two shall be joined together and become one flesh. And then God uses the illustration of marriage throughout the Old Testament to describe the faithfulness, or more often the unfaithfulness, of Israel. And by the time we get to the book of Revelation, we see this great invitation to the wedding of the bride and the groom, Jesus Christ and his church. And so marriage is a big thing to God. And so I don't find it peculiar that he takes time in the middle of all that's happening to spotlight this thing. And we're going to approach that a little bit or from that angle today. Now, we don't have the opportunity to look at it in detail, and some of you just went, "Whew, that's good. I don't want to do that." Others of you are going, "I don't know what he's talking about." With those of you who went, "Whew," please tell the other ones why that is that you went, "Whew," about it, okay? But I'd like to think that Song of Solomon comes out in kind of a 4-act play with a little epilogue at the end, and we're going to look at it. So if you will, grant me just a measure of dramatic license, but simply to look at the text and see if we can't see the scene and see what God has to say about love and courtship and marriage and faithfulness, because I believe that it is the thread that runs through Song of Solomon, and it is at the heart of its message. So imagine yourself, you're in the great theater, the lights have dimmed, the curtain begins to come up, you begin to hear the orchestra play the first few bars of the soundtrack for the play, and the scene is set for us. If you were to look at it in a script, you might see something about the scene, but we find ourselves in the bride's-to-be chamber. I picture a kind of, though this would have certainly been a pre-medieval scene, I kind of picture this lady who is in the castle and she's looking out the window and she is reflecting. It may very well be, and we'll see it at the end of the book, that this is all reflective. That is a couple that has remained faithful to one another, and they are still together, and they're at their 50th wedding anniversary, and they're saying, "Do you remember when?" But that seems to be the imagery. It begins in verse 2, as which the bride here expresses in self-reflection what is her anticipation. "May he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. Your oils have a pleasing fragrance. Your name is like purified oil. Therefore the maidens love you. Draw me after you, and let us run together. The king has brought me into his chambers. We will rejoice in you and be glad. We will extol your love more than wine. Rightly do they love you." So she's thinking about her groom. This is a young woman, a young maiden, and she's thinking about her groom and how wonderful, and she describes real, genuine love. She talks about the physical attraction. She talks about the emotional attraction. She talks about the character, and not one of those alone is what real, genuine love is. Sometimes we may think it's the emotional aspect. Some might think it's the physicality of the relationship, but it really is all of those things combined. And she has said, "It is no wonder that everybody loves the man that I love." In what Tammy and I use as kind of the verse for our marriage seminars, in verse 4, "Draw me after you and let us run together." The literal text says, "Let us run away." And so it's that idea of, she says, I'm looking forward to the adventure that lies ahead. And whereas she has a favorable view of her groom, I imagine her standing not only in front of a window, but one of these full-length mirrors, and she begins to look at herself, perhaps in reality, perhaps in comparison to what she thinks is this beautiful, handsome groom that she has, but she does not have the same favorable view of herself. She says, "I am black," or perhaps better translated, "I am darkened but lovely. O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon, do not stare at me, because I am swarthy. For the sun has burned me. My mother's sons were angry with me. They made me caretaker of the vineyards, but I have not taken care of my own vineyard." What is she saying? She says, "Listen, I'm a farm gal." She goes, "My skin, it is darkened and it is leathery from working in the vineyards. Perhaps her hands are coarse from twisting those vines and harvesting that fruit." She says, "I didn't have a lot of time for those womanly ways, for those feminine things. Here's this beautiful, handsome man that's going to be my groom, and I'm not much to look at." I mean, I'm not even sure if I know what swarthy is, but I don't think swarthy's a good thing, right? She says, so I am swarthy. And she begins to think about, it seems as this unfolds, that she begins to think about a time in which they were together. It comes in verse 9. Again, we're going to be hopping through the text as we do not have time for all of it, and certainly to describe all of its imagery. We say, to me, my darling, you are like a mare amongst the Pharaoh. Your cheeks are lovely with ornaments, your neck with strings of beads. We will make for you ornaments of gold with bells of silver. And while the king was at his table, my perfume gave forth its fragrance. My beloved is to me a pouch of myrrh, or a sachet, which lies all night between my breasts, which is my beloved is to the cluster of henna blossoms in the vineyards. Here's what we've got. I picture this long kind of medieval dining table. At one end is the groom-to-be, at one end as the bride-to-be. The king is at this end and his bride-to-be is at this end. Maybe there's food distributed. There are the servants that are ministering and serving them. And the conversation is kind of like, you're awful beautiful tonight. And she says, you're equally handsome. But as the dinner goes on, I envision them moving kind of closer and closer together. As we see this fostering of love, as this first section might be marked, they begin to grow closer and closer and closer together. And as the conversation becomes still appropriate, but more personal and more intimate, I envision them coming closer and closer and closer together, where they finally get to a point where she's going, you really are handsome. And he says, you really are beautiful. So we're seeing not only a closeness in geography, but we're beginning to see the hearts becoming entangled. They're beginning to have an affection for one another. But it seems as if this carries over out of the dining hall, and those French doors that open to the garden are cast open, and they grab everything in the tablecloth and they take it out underneath the archways of the trees, and they begin to have what I guess we would just call kind of a romantic picnic. And so as this all develops, you'll notice that he says in verse 15, how beautiful you are, my darling. Goes on, how beautiful you are. Your eyes are like doves, and how handsome you are, and pleasant, and so pleasant. And indeed, our couch is luxuriant, probably better translated, it is green, or green like a carpet. The beams of our house are cedars, our rafters are cypresses. And so what we have is, we have this couple now, they are enveloped by the cypress trees. The sunlight is coming through, perhaps even beginning to set. They are there in a romantic but still an appropriate embrace, and they're expressing their love for one another. And so as this unfolds, we begin to see these expressions that declare what is the anticipation that they have for one another. Notice it says, you are like a lily amongst the thorns. Verse 4, his banner over me is love. Verse 5, I am love sick, not sick of love. I am love sick. I am overwhelmed. And she describes in verse 6, let his left hand be under my head and his right hand embrace me. This is the idea of protection and provision. She says, I can't wait until we're together forever. And that's what I need from you, is I need you as my husband to care for me. Those expressions go on in verse 11. Verse 10, arise, my darling, my beautiful one, and come along. And so this idea of an invitation for this relationship. Now, probably this is reflective. She's there thinking about her groom coming. She's thinking about herself. She remembers as their love, they started courting, they started dating, they started growing in their love. And then it flashes back to kind of reality, or to the current time. And it says in chapter 2, in verse 8, listen, my beloved, behold, he is coming, climbing on the mountains, leaping on the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle, a young stag. Behold, he is standing behind our wall. He is looking through the windows. He is peering through the lattice. Now, I will tell you, that sounds a little creepy, right? But what she says is, He is in pursuit of me. A valid, a healthy, a romantic pursuit. So picture less like the creeper and more like the Romeo and Juliet. He's in the garden saying, Juliet, Juliet, and she's going, oh, my Romeo, my Romeo. That's what she envisions is this. But she has a prayer, and perhaps it is the natural tendency to think about, I don't want anything to mess this up. In verse 15 of chapter 2, she says, catch the little foxes for us, the little foxes that are ruining the vineyards while our vineyards are in the blossom. No doubt, recalling from her own work in the vineyards and how these wild animals could come through and destroy the crops, she uses that metaphor to describe anything that could interfere. It's almost a prayer. God, don't let anything mess this up. Don't let things intrude. What she doesn't realize is she's speaking to something that we're going to have revealed to us a little bit later that is at the center of every single marriage problem there is. In fact, it is at the center of every single problem of any kind that we have, especially those that are related in some way to sin or to a broken world. But we'll leave that for a little bit. She says in verse 16, it's my wife's favorite verse, my beloved is mine and I am his. This is a statement of commitment. It said, I love him, he loves me. I'm committed to him, he's committed to me. I'm going to be faithful to him, he's going to be faithful to me. It is that joint agreement of two who have come together in this romantic relationship. As chapter 3 opens, though, she has a dream. I don't know if any of you men have ever experienced this, if your wife has ever had a dream in which you were in some ways not who you were supposed to be. I remember Tammy one time, we just seemed a little out of sorts in the morning, and I said, what's going on this morning? And she said, I had a dream last night. I caught you kissing another woman. And I said, well, you know that was a dream, right? And she said, yes, but I'm still kind of mad at you. Well, she's going to have a dream right here. She says, on my bed at night, verse 1 of chapter 3, after night I sought them whom my soul loves. I sought him, but I did not find him. I must arise now and go about the city and the streets and the squares. I must seek him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but did not find him. The watchman who made the rounds in the city found me. And I said, have you seen him whom my soul loves? Scarcely had I left him when I found him whom my soul loves. I held on to him and would not let go until I had brought him to my mother's house and into the room of her who conceived me. So his point was, she goes, I had this dream and I couldn't find him and he was lost and I'm running through the streets and I asked the night watchman, have you seen this guy wandering around? Looks like he's helpless and lost and I need to find him. And finally she says, I found him. And this idea of intended commitment, I wrapped my arms around him and I would not let him go. What she doesn't know is that she has had a dream that is going to be prophetic and is going to be played out in their own real relationship. So, curtain drops on act number 1. Curtain comes up for act number 2. The music changes. This is a celebratory music. It's full of orchestration because everyone has assembled for the wedding of this young man and this young woman. Very different than the weddings that we experience in our traditional Western American culture. The wedding of this period of time could last a week to multiple weeks. It was not uncommon for it to be a month, which the families would all travel in together to the site of the wedding. There would be a time of getting to know one another and enjoying one another and celebrating this marriage as it came about. It would come to be where the marriage ceremony would take place. The couple would actually enter into their tent where they would spend their honeymoon with all of their in-laws camped all the way around the tent. Just think about that. You thought the walls were thin at the Motel 6. Anyway, that's where they're at here. And so we have this beautiful scene. And in we see in chapter 3 and verse 6, we have this arrival of the groom. What is this coming up from the wilderness? Like the columns of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all the scented powders of the merchants. Behold, it is the traveling couch of Solomon, 60 mighty men, the mighty men of Israel. All of them are wielders of the sword, experts in war. Each man has a sword at his side, guarding against the terrors of the night. King Solomon has made for himself a sedan chair from the timbers of Lebanon. He had made it of the posts of silver, and he goes on to describe this. But here's what she says. I see it. It looks like puffs of smoke, but it's the dirt's being kicked up by the horses that are the entourage of Solomon. Where he's been, we don't know. He could have been off taking care of some kingly business. He could have been at war. It seems as if, from her description, he's been on a shopping trip. He's coming back with gifts for his bride to present her on her wedding day. Talks about Solomon having this couch. I said this is the first love seat that we've ever had. This would have probably been the vessel in which, when he and her traveled back to his castle, that they would have traveled in this. I don't know if it had just married on the back of the horse and there was cans tied to the wagon, but that's the picture we have, and she's going, the wedding day is here. Solomon is arriving. I have been waiting anxiously. Imagine for some of you brides who have gone through that tradition of not seeing your groom for maybe 24 hours plus before the wedding. You know how that anticipation is building. That seems to be the scene that we have here. I wish we could talk a little bit more about it, but what we have is that we have this series from chapter 4 or through chapter 4, a series of expressions that Solomon makes about his bride. He says, how beautiful you are, my darling, how beautiful you are. Verse 7, you are altogether beautiful, my darling, and there is no blemish in you. Verse 9, you have made my heart beat faster with a single glance. Verse 10, how much better is your love than wine. Verse 15, you are a garden spring, a well of fresh water. And so Solomon begins the ceremony by telling the bride in front of everyone how absolutely beautiful she is. And so that's the scene, but then there is a very unique expression of vows. We have those vows of, do you promise to love, honor, cherish, sickness, health, rich, poor, good time, bad time, till death do you part? I do. All right. They're just ready to get to the cake. That's all there is. So here we have a pattern. Notice we have these expressions of love. And then in verse 8, come with me from Lebanon, my bride. May you come with me from Lebanon. Journey down from the summit of Amana, from the summit of Senir and Hermon, from the dens of lions, from the mountains of leopards. And then again, you have made my heart beat faster than my sister, my bride. By the way, his expression of sister is not some twisted, perverted. He says, we are going to be as close. Up to this point, we're going to see him refer to her as my love and my sister, and she begins to be described as his bride from here moving forward. He just says this is going to be as close as a blood relationship as we are joined together. And so what he says is, he's already obviously asked her to marry him, but he says, will you be my bride? It's an invitation of sort, and he makes a request in verse 12. A garden locked is my sister, my bride, a garden locked, a spring sealed up. He is speaking of her chastity, her purity, which she has reserved for her groom. And rather than saying, I am taking now what's mine because you're my wife, he says, I am asking for that thing, that precious gift. Will you give that to me? And then we see in verse 16, she responds, awake, O north wind, and come wind of the south. Make my garden breathe out fragrance. Let its spices be wafted abroad. May my beloved come into the garden and eat its choice fruit. So he asked for her chastity, and she offers it back to him. But even then, with that, notice that he has a respectful acceptance of that gift in verse 1 of chapter 5. I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh along with my balsam. I have eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk. In other words, he asks for her chastity. She offers her chastity. He respectfully receives her chastity. That makes some sense? Because if it doesn't, we're in trouble. I'm going to have to be more graphic, and all of you are going to be embarrassed. I'm just telling you. So the two would enter into their tent for their honeymoon, whether or not the last half of verse 1 of chapter 5, eat, friends, drink, and imbibe deeply, O lovers, may have been a toast of the groom's father. It could have been Solomon's own words. It may be the caterer. There's still roast beef left. Eat until it's gone. But that idea was the celebration of the family would have continued on even though they had gone into their tent. Scene curtain drops, scene ends, the music comes up for scene 3 or act 3, and it is a more sobering sound. It is darker, it is deeper, it is more of the bass tone, because the dream the bride had had before is now going to come to fruition. Notice it begins in verse 2 of chapter 5. I was asleep, but my heart was awake. That indicates she's dreaming. My beloved was knocking. Now this is really happening. Open to me, my sister, my darling, my love, my perfect one, for my head is drenched with dew, my locks with the damp of night. I have taken, and she responds, I've taken off my dress. How can I put it on again? I have washed my feet. How can I dirty them again? My beloved extended his hand through the opening, and my feelings were aroused for him. I arose to open to my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh and fingers with liquid myrrh on the handles of the bolt. I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had turned away and had gone. See if I can bring this into modern vernacular. The king is away, his bride is at home. She puts on her bedclothes, she washes her feet, she goes to sleep. She is awoken by a knock on the door. The king says, honey, it's me. I forgot my key. Would you please let me in? And she responds abruptly, you inconsiderate thing. It is late at night. He responds, hon, I'm wet, I am cold, I am tired. Just come and unlock the door. And she says, I am in my nightgown. I have my feet washed. And you want me to get up and come unlock the door to you, for you. Now, the text says that my beloved, speaking of the groom, he put his fingers through the eye hole, the opening. Now, I will just tell you how two different people interpret this differently. My wife says that the bride, seeing the hand of her groom, went, oh, that's the one I love. And I'm glad to get up and romantically string all the way over to the door to unlatch it. Even apparently time for her to put on a little perfume before she gets there. I tend to think he hands his hand through that has the king's signet ring on it and says, I'm the king. I order you to unlock the door. You decide for yourself. But nevertheless, she gets there. And when she opens the door, he has gone to the Holiday Inn to spend the night because he is cold, wet, and tired. And what she had dreamed about before now comes to fruition. And she says, my heart went out for him as he spoke, but I searched for him and I could not find him. I called him. He did not answer me. The watchmen who make the rounds in the city found me. They struck me and wounded me. The guardsmen of the walls took away my shawl from me. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, for you, as to what you will tell him, for I am lovesick or faint with love. So here's what she says. She goes, I didn't concern myself with wearing a nightgown. I ran out into the night. Perhaps her garment now being soaked by the water, becoming even translucent, if not transparent. The guardsmen and those who live at night because their deeds are evil, they tried to attack her. They tried to take her. So all of a sudden we have this imagery of outside of the king's presence, she is at risk. She is at harm. And all the things that seem to matter, the little foxes of selfness, not selfishness. Selfishness is my sister has 2 cookies and won't give me one. Selfness is I am the center of everything. In a marriage, in a family, when a spouse becomes in their own mind the center of everything, problems arise. In our world, when we begin to think it's all about us and what we get out of it, and what people are supposed to be and do for us, that's when problems arise. The sin of selfness is at the center of all sin. Sometimes it reflects itself in pride, sometimes in unforgiveness, any number of things. And the bride said, I forgot, my focus was on my groom, I have made it about me, and now I am here alone and in harm's way. Goes on, and she does find him. And when she does, she, like in the dream, wraps her arms around him and again says, I never want to let you go. That was terrible. And so even in those frustrations of love, there is a lesson to be learned. Notice in chapter 6 and verse 3, I am my beloved, and my beloved's is mine. He who pastures his flock amongst the lilies. The lesson has been learned on her part. The curtain falls and the orchestra changes its tone again, a little more spring-like. The sun is setting, the curtain comes up. An aged couple now reflecting back on their life, perhaps envisioning them at the end of a 50th wedding celebration, having reflected on these things. They have endured through the difficult years, and they have remained faithful to each other. Chapter 7 and verse 11, verse 10, I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. And what remains in the majority of, or the rest of this chapter and the majority of the next, is we see the faithfulness of love as it is depicted here. There are some expressions. Verse 3, let his left hand be under my head and his right hand embrace me. You remember that from their garden picnic, right? She says, that's where I always want to be, in his arms. I imagine that she thinks about the time that when they were having the picnic and she fell asleep. And there he says to her, or to those, he says, let her sleep. There is a peace that she is experiencing. Whereas she wants his protection, he says, I want to protect her. I want her to be comforted. Verse 4, do not arouse or awaken my love until she pleases. Verse 6, put me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm, for love is as strong as death. Reminiscent of the king's embossed seal that would have said, this is not to be broken by anyone. And then he says, many waters cannot quench love, nor will rivers overflow it. If a man were to be given all the riches of the house for love, it would utterly be despised. One might say, if this was Solomon, one of the wealthiest men in all of human history, he says, I would count it all as worthless in comparison to love. There is no price that you can pay on the affection that we share for one another. Now, the proposal that the bride has at the very beginning of chapter 8 is the scene for this. She says, we've had some tough times. We've seen our way through them. What we could do is a second honeymoon. And he says, that's great. What did you have in mind? Listen to her idea. Oh, that you were like a brother to me. In other words, I'd like to be back to how it was when we first started dating. Whom nursed at my mother's breast. If I found you outdoors, I would kiss you. No one would despise me either. In other words, I want to leave these things all over again. I would not lead you and bring you into the house of my mother who used to instruct me. I would give you spice wine to drink from the juice of my pomegranates. You know what she says? I've got a great idea for a second honeymoon. Let's go to my mom's place. And he's going, no. In fact, at the end of the chapter, you find out that the brothers aren't big fans of Solomon. It doesn't seem like maybe they said, hey, you remember the time? You came late at night. Our sister told us. You knocked on the door. She had to get up. And then you were gone. She was out on the street. People tried to grab her. Maybe that's the case. That's the kind of epilogue on this. But the truth is, she says, let's rekindle this back to the way that it was. Let's make it what it was supposed to be all along. And so we have this beautiful picture of faithfulness as it is demonstrated, as it is expressed, includes commitment. It is more than just the promise made, it is the promise kept. A promise made that is not kept is a lie, but a promise that is kept is a beautiful thing of faithfulness. And that really is the story of the Song of Solomon. There's some imagery in there. It is romantic, and at times it is very, very intimate. But simply put, I think it tells us a lot about what real love should be and how important faithfulness is and the things to avoid and to observe along that way. One interesting side note, and with it we will conclude our thoughts for today, and that is that if in fact this is, as some suppose, a portion of Solomon's story, and some suppose that his relationship with the Shunammite woman, both Solomon's name as well as Shunammite in the Shunammite language both mean the same thing, peace. And it seems as if that we are told that the relationship between this man and this woman, this groom and this bride, this husband and wife, is to be a place of peace, where the two, when they are more concerned about the others, when they're less concerned about themselves, when they remember the love that they felt in the beginning and they maintain to the very end the promises they kept, it is a house that is full of peace. And in a world that is chaotic and so lacking in peace, it should very well be that the home is the place of refuge from all of that. Let's close with a word of prayer. And they said I would hear a bell. I've been hearing bells in my head for a long time. I just couldn't sort out which one was the right bell. So you may get an extra couple of minutes before our worship, but let's pray. Thank you very much for your kind attention. God, thank you for this insertion in your divine word, your revealed word to us. And though it may be that the imagery presents a challenge for us at times, and perhaps it is that we shy away from it because of the intimacy of it. Even if we don't fully understand who this was written about, it seems quite clear what it is written about. And that is the relationship that you established in the very beginning between men and women that we so frequently call marriage. And how it is that marriages are sustained through a great affection for one another, and the lessening of self in that relationship, and a seeking of the well-being and a recognition of the other and what they bring to that relationship, and the all-important faithfulness, and a message that goes beyond the text of Song of Solomon, not only to the faithfulness of a husband to a wife and a wife to her husband, but a faithfulness of a people to their God. And may we reflect it in our marriage, may we reflect it in our families, may we reflect it in our lives, our faithfulness to you. That is my prayer for all of us. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.